If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my friend Mike Jackness. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, Mads. It's good to finally be on this. We've talked lots in person, but never on the podcast, so this should be fun.
Indeed. And I'm excited to talk management as always. But just before we kick off, Mike, could you give the audience a little bit of background to yourself and how you ended up where you are right now?
Oh man, it's never a little bit anymore because I've been getting older and older, and the story gets longer and longer. But I was an entrepreneur at a very young age. I came from an entrepreneurial family. I started my first business when I was 18, and I did have a corporate job for 7 years. So did that for a bit as well. Put on a suit and tie every day and was on the executive team, but always was really an entrepreneur at heart. And so after 5 or 6 years of being in that corporate gig, I started getting that shiny object syndrome and started my own business again. And it's been 18 years since I left that job. And the rest is history, as they say. Mostly been doing affiliate marketing and e-commerce throughout those years. And so kind of split half and half, really. The first large chunk of it was just doing various affiliate marketing, SEO, content marketing through, affiliate links. And then at some point, I decided to turn one of our affiliate sites into an e-commerce site, and been doing that for quite a while. And now some days I wonder what the hell I was thinking, because managing inventory is a lot more difficult than just managing affiliate links. And along the way, I've had teams of various sizes, from our peak of 66 people back in the heyday of our peak of our affiliate stuff to today. I think we have 24, 25 people total on staff right now.
Solid. Well, yeah, business is really a one-way street, so that's peaks and troughs, and it's. I think people going into entrepreneurship and building their own business and expecting it to just be a uphill, easy, step-by-step thing, and they're probably gonna get disappointed a lot. But
yeah, without a doubt. I think that, especially if you haven't done it before. I've certainly been in this position, and so. I'm talking about myself at the same time I'm talking about everybody else out there. But the tendency is you're excited about something, right? You want to start a business doing whatever it is. And the excitement often leads you down a path of thinking about all the exciting things. And very rarely do you think about the non-exciting stuff, the non-sexy stuff. And there's that saying, like, what you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know. And in business, that third category is often the thing that can kind of kick your butt. And a lot of it, you're just learning along the way. Like, there is no way to have previous experience being a CEO of 100-person, 200-person, whatever company, unless you just happen to come from that world. And so you're going to learn along the way what it's like hiring your first person, and when you promote your first manager, what you deal with when you have your first sexual harassment suit, or your first person suing you, or whatever it might be. All these things are pretty much in the category of not if they're going to happen, but when they're going to happen. And almost certainly they've never happened to you before, so you have to learn how to deal with it as they come.
Yeah, 100%. People stealing from you, people trusted employees not being so trusted, and stuff happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things recently, Mike, have been this whole pandemic and so on, right? And businesses have obviously gone through that in very different ways. Luckily, at least from our side, a lot of online businesses have not been hit as hard as people running a restaurant or whatever, right?
Right.
But
yeah.
How did you get around the whole pandemic, and what happened to you guys?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I guess let's just start first with what happened with our business overall, and then we can talk about the people component. As you mentioned, if we owned a restaurant, we would have been up the creek without a paddle. We do sell products online, e-commerce stuff. I have friends that were just as much up the creek. For instance, one of my really good friends sells packing cubes and travel accessories. Well, there was basically no need for those products any longer. It had no bearing with the fact that he was an online business or not. I mean, his business just still went to zero. We were pretty fortunate that we own multiple brands, which is something that I don't necessarily advocate for, because when you have too many businesses, it's hard to run them all well. But in this case, it helped us tremendously because we were diversified. So some of our products kind of went to zero, some of them skyrocketed, which then brought in their own set of challenges. But overall, in terms of sales numbers, we did okay. The other ancillary problems, we didn't quite do so okay. So I mean, think of things like shipping prices skyrocketed. Amazon and other fulfillment companies were having a hard time receiving inventory. So even if you had stuff, you couldn't quite sell it. They were raising their fees quite a bit. Everything shifted to online. So everyone was pouring more and more money into online ads and things of this nature. So it was a very difficult and turbulent time. Just like with anything else in business, I think that you can hem and haw and complain about it, or you can just immediately take action and realize that there's nothing you can do about it and figure out the best way to deal with your new set of circumstances. And that basically is how I felt the last 3 years have gone, or 2.5, whatever it's been. It feels like it's been a couple of decades, but I think it's been 2.5, 3 years. And yeah, I mean, it's been a bunch of just dealing with the punches as they come. And then the people component was another whole thing we can get into.
I think fundamentally, I mean, if you want to age fast, entrepreneurship is definitely
right.
Definitely a great way to go.
When we first met each other, we both had these beautiful heads of hair that were not gray, and now we have between you and I, we might get a full head of hair together, and the gray's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those things. And as you say, I mean, honestly, even if it wasn't for COVID specifically, I mean, COVID was obviously different because it hit the whole environment and it hit everyone to some degree in some way, right?
Yeah.
But even as an entrepreneur, like even without COVID, like those kind of things still happen, right?
Of
like
course.
To your business, those kind of things still happen. And I think that's definitely what most people underestimate the most. But I think from a management standpoint specifically, right? How do you prepare for it? How do you put yourself in a situation to actually deal with some of these difficult issues that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of COVID specifically, I mean, we were woefully unprepared for that. I mean, I had never dealt with a pandemic in my lifetime. The thought of closing our office down at almost a moment's notice and having to deal with that was something that just never entered our mind. And oftentimes in business, actually all the times in business, all the things that have always knocked us off of our pedestal or been the thing that's like kind of wrecked our business, there's always a thing that's out of our control. I think that we've done a really good job over the years of anything that we can control. I'll work harder than the next guy. I'll plan better than the next guy. I'll just continue to work on something to a point where we're as prepared as we can be. But the things that you can't prepare for, whether it's a Google update or Amazon changing their way of doing things, or a recession or interest rates or a pandemic, are often the things that can really screw business up. We've also had legal changes and other things like that happen. Some laws passed in other businesses that we had that we just weren't. It kind of caught us off guard. And so usually those things are the things that get you. And certainly managing people through the pandemic was quite difficult. And we had, I think we kept the tires on the bus, the wheels on the bus for quite a while there. And eventually a couple of years into it, like we just really, really felt the ramifications of it.
Yeah. And it's difficult, right? Because particularly when you build a great team and you have a lot of great staff, right? Like starting to let go of people, for example, is definitely difficult, right? But reality is sometimes, and again, it obviously depends on your financial status and how the company's doing, but sometimes you have no choice. And
Yeah.
I mean, one thing is when you have a poor performer, let them go, right? I mean, that's typically hard enough for most people, but when you actually have great people that you have to let go due to external circumstances, that
Yeah. It's tough. I mean,
obviously,
we've definitely been through that before. That business I mentioned had 66 employees at its peak. The U.S. government had passed a law in the middle of the night in Congress making online gaming illegal. We were mostly in online gaming affiliates, and we had a bunch of people go as a result of that. And this go around, we were starving for people, so we weren't trying to let anybody go, but we did have a bunch of people leave on their own accord because they felt like we weren't a good place to work any longer, which was very difficult for me personally, because I'm very invested in people and probably more emotionally invested than I should be. And it was just a very difficult period to go through. I think we're on the back end of that now, but certainly it was a big wake-up call.
Yeah. Never fun. Never fun. How, I mean, so this was specifically pandemic, right? I think for me, definitely the biggest game in town is consistently people, right? So what do you guys typically do to find great people and make sure that, the people you bring on board is the right one for your business?
Yeah, I mean, we are slow to hire and quick to fire is kind of the buzz phrase you hear a lot out there. We're very much believers in that. And what that really means in practice is just putting an inordinate amount of effort into the interview process. We have I think like 4-phase kind of interview process, from just the initial resumes where you filter stuff out with a simple, you had to respond to this resume or this job offer with XYZ in the subject line, just to try to quickly filter out the worst of the worst junk, to having people do personality tests, to actually doing a work type test, interviewing with multiple people on the team, and then finally interviewing with me before we hire them. And anybody that we hire is on a six-month probationary period when they first come in the door. And everyone knows this now. And so it's not as big of a culture shock if we have to let somebody go. We've been fortunate that, I think we're at something like a 90% success rate over the last quite a long time of keeping the people that we actually do end up hiring, because we do put so much effort into that interview process. And so we're saying no way more than we're saying yes. Probably there are times where we're saying no to people that would have ultimately been great employees. But hopefully we're saying no to a lot of people who wouldn't have been good employees and wouldn't have been a good fit. No matter how hard you try, once you hire someone, once they're in the door, once other people get to meet them, even if they're clearly a horrible employee, it will rattle everybody when they get let go. And so we try to minimize that.
Yeah, and you're totally right. I mean, it is this process. A lot of time people are like, oh yeah, but why are you not putting these people, or why are you not including these people? Because they might be good. But the whole thing is that, I mean, work-wise, there's always a lot of potential out there, right? There's always a lot of people out there that you can hire. And fundamentally, the way we look at the interview process and recruitment process is very simple. It's always about avoiding failure if you possibly can, because the most expensive for your company is avoiding those failures, right? Not just, I mean, as you said, there's the human aspect to it, where if someone's let go around people, they're like, oh, is my job still safe? And, how am I? They let this person go. I thought they were okay. Obviously, other employees don't necessarily see and understand the performance of an individual, of every individual in the team, right? But that whole concept is something that you have to be very careful with, right? Now, at the same,
So I was going to say, we had a situation early in the very beginning of this year. We let an employee go who had been with us for about a year and 6 or 7 months, who was doing just an awful job. I mean, and he had been warned over and over again through every performance evaluation there were several other things that happened. It's kind of a long story. We don't need to get all into everything, but we let him go, and he was great at marketing himself and convincing everyone else that we were the bad guys, right? And so it's the repercussions of these things can be extreme. And we actually had like 8 other people kind of follow him out the door over the next few months because they all believe that we treated him unfairly and that they could be next, which is just really frustrating. I mean, you're always having to deal with these types of consequences and things you have to be thinking about every step along the way. And I mean, it sucks to be, scared of your own employees, but and what might happen when you do something to somebody, but you better have thought through all the ramifications before you pull the trigger and let someone go.
Yeah, and most importantly, again, prepare as much as you can. I mean, there will always be, as you said, just mentioned, right? Like there'll always be situations you can't deal with, but the clear expectations is up front, the clearer your feedback is, the better you are, right? I always say when people walk into the conversation and getting fired, if they're not expecting it, you're not doing a good job as a manager. And it happens constantly when I see that, people go into this last conversation and they're not expecting it at all. And they're literally blown away and they're like, well, what's wrong? And why am I getting fired? And all those kind of things, right? And if it's not ultra clear, if people are not literally expecting to walk into the room to get fired, you have not made clear enough as a business owner, as a manager to them, how poor their performance is and how that performance affects the business, right? Because if you have, they will be expecting to get fired. Right?
So what do you do, Mads, when you've done all that and they're still they're still surprised? Because that was kind of the situation we were at. It's not the first time it's happened, but it is definitely rare. I mean, normally people are pretty cognizant and understand when it gets to that phase that they've played the game as long as they could. They finally kind of got caught. They got what's coming to them. But then you have the person that refuses to take responsibility for themselves and is still surprised that this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, all you can do is your best, right? So in the end of the day, like the options you have is making sure that have been made very clear, right? Now, some roles in business, your KPIs are very straightforward. They're very easy. They're very, if you don't hit that number, not good enough, we'll need to let you go. Some roles that can be a little bit different, right? There's a lot of soft roles. Like we've had a couple of times with graphic designers, and graphic design is very, it's not necessarily a black and white thing, right?
Yeah, it's very subjective.
Exactly. So we've had a couple of times where we've had to talk with a person about performance, and initially they were great, but then over time they kind of started slacking, and it was very difficult to put this is the one thing you have to do, because they were churning out the work, as in they were delivering,
right?
But the quality was not where it should be and where it used to be, and that was very hard to, from a performance standpoint, address, right? Because it's like, we basically set up a process and we said, hey, we need X amount of designs that your manager approves, right? And obviously the person were like, oh, well, you're just harassing me. I do the same designs, same quality as I've always been, and so on, right? So we've definitely had some difficult situations like that. Now, luckily, most jobs are a little bit more, let's call it, straightforward in terms of performance measurement and so on, right? So when you have performance measurements and when you have guidelines, again, set as clear goals as you possibly can, all right? Make sure with people, doesn't matter if it's new people. I mean, what we typically do with brand new people is you set them a very clear goal out of the gate, and you say, your first 3 months or however long is a trial period, our goal for you in this period is get you from X to Y. And over that time, like even for yourself, just giving yourself an actual checkpoint to go in and see, okay, it's 2 months down the road. Is this new person actually performing? Right? That is so helpful, and it shows them very, very clearly, this is where I need to be. And it makes it very, very black and white if they're there or if they're not there. Right. And that's one thing that I've used both in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur, that is really, really helpful, right? Because honestly, by nature, I'm very conflict avoiding. And sometimes it's easier to sit and think, he'll probably get there, she'll probably get there. And eventually they'll figure it out. But reality is when you have to sit down with yourself and you have to say, okay, 3 months is up. This was the goal. Are they there? Yes or no? That at least forces you to take a very, very close look and say, if they are extremely close, am I making an exception? Am I making an exception for the right reason? But the fundamental question that I learned to ask myself is, if this person was to resign today, would there be any relief, any feeling of relief in me? Now, here's the thing. If any one of your employees get your feeling of relief if they would resign, you're not doing the right thing. Because if you get relief feel relief as an employee resign, they should probably not be in your business, and you need to take the right action as a manager or as a business owner, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's one of the big ones that, and I've been there. I mean, I've been there when I've had employees walking in as a poor performer and said, "Oh, I'm giving up." And sometimes it's through a process, and you just because people don't perform for 2 minutes doesn't necessarily mean you should let them go, right? But and this is the thing. Like, often what happens is when people are not performing well, and you tell them, they often see the signs on the door, right? So a lot of the time they will actually come into you and say, "Hey, I have a feeling I'm not cut out for this job. It's not going the way I expected, and I think I should maybe look for something else." And that's significantly more likely to actually happen, right? But the whole point is, don't sit around and wait for that. If people realize they're not performing and leave, that's okay. But don't sit around and wait for that to happen, because a lot of people will not, right? For a lot of people around the world, it's a question of, I have a job. And even with people who hate their job, like, you see so many people around the world that literally don't like the job they have, but they'd rather spend their life complaining about the job than actually putting in the effort to find a new one, right? So it's important. It's very important to take the right steps. But again, you want to make sure that you give people a fair opportunity to deliver what they need to deliver, and you need to make it very, very clear to them what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you were talking a little bit about COVID and COVID challenges earlier. I'm curious, like, how things developed for you. I mean, so we were an entirely work at the office company. I was really big on that. I thought that, camaraderie was so much easier. We had built this family atmosphere by having everybody together, and everybody helped each other with their projects and would go to lunch together. And, that was something we funded, but also we knew that they would also go to dinner together or have drinks afterwards. And then, the pandemic sends everyone home. And inevitably you start hiring more people throughout the pandemic, or at least we did. We were hiring, not firing, and our team continued to grow. And then, a couple of years go by, and our team is now 3x the size. And most of these people have never met each other in person and have zero camaraderie. It was a really wild period for us. I mean, was that something that you experienced as well?
So I have multiple businesses, obviously. For me, we definitely saw it in one of our companies. I don't think it was much of an issue for us, to be honest. So even though we had an office and we had a fair chunk of people in an office, generally it was not as big as a thing. Obviously, from a management standpoint, what I always tell people is that remote is very difficult if you're not a good manager. Right? Because basically there's things that you can make up for being in person, like just small talk conversations, etc. That just happens when you're physically with someone else. I think if you're a good manager, if you're generally great at motivating your staff, there's definitely less of an impact, right? But I saw with many of my management coaching clients that there was a lot of impact for some of them, right?
Yeah.
Like some of them really saw a big difference. We didn't see a huge change, to be honest. For us, we definitely had people that worked in an office that was where it was a big mental challenge. And reality is, working from home just requires a different level of discipline from everyone.
Yeah.
Than it does working in an office, right? And we initially, when we started out my outsourcing company, which is manpower-wise the biggest one, we mostly did the office because it was a good way to train people. Like, training someone face to face is very, very different than training them in a remote
absolutely
way, right? So, and that was a big reason why initially we were having an office and all this sort of stuff. Honestly, when the pandemic came, we actually had a bunch of people who didn't have computers at home, didn't have internet at home. Now, obviously, we had the computers in the office, and
Right.
we would literally gift them the hardware, and we would you know, enable them to work from home with the hardware, and we'll bring someone to go back to their home, set it up for them, and some of them needed to get internet as well. They didn't have internet previously, and so on, right? Now, this is obviously the Philippines. I know most
Yeah.
places in the US, everyone probably have internet nowadays, right? But in the Philippines, that was not necessarily the case. So we definitely had employees where it took a little bit of change and difficult approach to get it set up. But I think company-wise, we were doing well. I think the biggest thing I'm missing is we used to do more retreats and so on. And again, we started, again, just like you mentioned, we started hiring all over the Philippines instead of as primarily in the area where our office was based.
Right.
And that's probably what made that thing the biggest challenge, because obviously from a business standpoint, if you need to fly people in from everywhere, that's obviously a different level of cost than, if everyone is living next door to each other and you can go to a sort of semi-local spot and hang out with people and so on, right? So I think that was definitely a bigger challenge to the whole sort of team culture in terms of, again, people meeting, but also just hanging out with people, and even me as a business owner, like being able to spend time with my team, right? So I used to live a good part of my time in my life in the Philippines with the team, right? And basically I had a year and a half where I couldn't enter the country. So that's a long time when you're used to living next door to them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was in this situation where I was lucky to have amazing managers and really, really great team, right? And we did lose a few clients initially early on. We had a couple of clients sort of in the travel industry and so on. And obviously as soon as they saw COVID, they shut down, right? Like they could see where it was going. So we did have a hit early on, but luckily enough, we did manage to keep majority of our staff throughout the period, because we luckily had other income businesses and so on that did very well through the pandemic, and therefore needed to increase in size. So we were pretty fortunate about that. I certainly we had to let some people go, right? It was definitely not everyone that we managed to keep around, but it could have been a lot worse, let's say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Philippines. I mean, we also have, as you know, a large pool of people working in the Philippines for us as well. I've loved working with our team there. They're just the dynamic has always been great. But you talk about some of the challenges through COVID, having to go home for work. And so you mentioned having to make sure they have a computer to take home with them, which we had to do, being able to get them internet at home, which we did. There's another whole set of circumstances. Like a lot of these guys are living with 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10 people under one roof. It's just constant commotion and chaos in there. So it's like hard to find a quiet spot to work from. Oftentimes there's noise, what I would call noise pollution outside the home, whether that's chickens or roosters crowing to just a bunch of traffic noises, horns beeping, or whatever it might be, people fighting and screaming. There was a whole bunch of other things to overcome as well. And then there was the other side of it, the few people that we had that lived alone, who had gotten to a point where they were, they had left their family home and were living on their own. The isolation was brutal. Like they were given a pass to leave once a week to go get groceries for a couple of hours, and otherwise they were stuck at home, effectively in jail, in solitary confinement, and it was a big struggle.
Yeah, and totally, and that's obviously a bigger struggle for some than for others. But obviously, when you've been used to living a normal life,
some of them loved it. By the way, some people were like, "Oh, this is awesome! Like I'm gonna read all my books now, and no one's bothering me." It's interesting how everyone has a different personality. Or there's, I guess 8 personalities or so to choose from, and one or two of those loves to be isolated.
Yeah, and I think a big thing as well is just, for me, one thing is the actual distractions around, which is difficult, but also if you haven't been used to it, or if the staff haven't been used to it, like really the discipline it takes, because it's so easy to go put on some washing, do some other things, and suddenly you're like, oh well, I worked 8 hours, but in reality you probably worked 5, right? Like that happens so much easier at home. I know that for myself when I first started working
Yeah.
online, right? Like obviously as a business owner, you have a different level of skin in the game, but for people who are working, they can easily feel, hey, it went from 8 to 5. I've worked, I've been busy, but reality is the output might be a very different one, right? So, and this is also different from personality types, right? Like some people are extremely good at keeping the discipline and doing things, where some people have a very difficult time, and particularly in a culture like the Philippines, right? If you're at home, your family's like, hey, I know you're kind of working, but can you go do some groceries? Can you go do this? Can you go do this, please? In a culture where you don't say no to your parents or the elders or
Right.
whichever, uh, that can be difficult to handle. And we've definitely had some times where we had to help our staff out with helping to explain to their families that they were at home, yes, but they were actually working and they actually had a job. And if they weren't able to do that job, they would get fired and the paychecks would stop coming. And we've definitely had some employees that have been literally asking for help to explain this to their families. And that's definitely, again, a different culture. Like in the US, for example, like you wouldn't have to explain that to anyone, right? Like that, it's kind of natural.
I
And
don't know, man.
people
My
understand.
wife's pretty good at giving me the honeydew list. It's like honeydew this, honeydew that. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I better not that one. But yeah, no, but that's yeah. That I mean, different challenges, many different challenges, Mike. What's some of the biggest challenges you've seen over the years? Like if we take away from COVID, but just in general, sort of building up a team the way you've done it. I mean, you're up at some very large teams, right? So what's generally
Yeah.
the things you find being the biggest challenge as a business owner and managing and finding people and so on?
I mean, for me, I just again, I don't know what it is, man. I think that, well, actually, I do know what it is. I'm very much a people person. I tend to really care about people quite a bit and get invested in their lives. And I think I'm finally at a point where I really just have realized this. I'm kind of a little bit jaded, which makes me sad, but that you're not always going to get the same in return. And that's something that's difficult for me, where you're thinking about your employees all day long and like how everything you do affects them and making sure that they're happy and that they're, when they ask for something or they bring up a concern, that you try to do everything you can to address it and produce the best work environment possible. And you do all this through thick and thin. I mean, when it's, feast time of the business, it's easy to do. When there's so much money going around, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you need, man, like I'll just do it. But like when it's famine time, like I had been through a lot of these COVID years, um, we continue to do a lot of these things, even though it comes directly out of our pocket, and we could even be losing money in the business just to make sure that the people are happy. And when you don't get the same in return, it's very difficult. And I think a management consultant like yourself would say, well, you can't allow yourself to be in this position, that this is foolish, but it's also difficult to make someone be a completely different person than they are by nature. And so I wrestle with these two things quite a bit, but I'm definitely at a point where it's just very, very difficult to me from like the human capital point of view of people are going to come and go. It's very difficult to avoid that. And no matter how hard you try, their perception might be very different from where it is. And the fact of the matter is they don't really owe you anything. Because I mean, if the situation were reversed, where you did have to let someone go because you just simply couldn't afford them anymore, you would give them no notice and maybe a couple of weeks severance. And so, it's just kind of the way the world is. It's harsh. Business is harsh and unfair. And, it's just one of these things you have to deal with. I've always admired someone like a Bill Gates or like a Steve Jobs, maybe an Elon Musk, these types of people that are all very well known that start as employee number one with 3 or 4 people in the room in the garage. Someone like Bill Gates, it was like him and one other guy. Steve Jobs, him and 2 other guys or whatever. And they grow to a team of thousands or tens of thousands and are able to adapt at all the challenges along the way and build the proper management team and structure, it's impressive. And I think, part of it's luck, part of it's that those first couple hires or that manager, you can put all the effort you want into it, but like, are they really on board? Are they gonna, are their life's goals and aspirations going to align with yours, to be able to help you build that team? It's partially, some of it's luck. I think, probably, if Steve Jobs were still alive, or if you could ask Bill Gates, I bet you they would say that, like, if it weren't for 1, 2, or 3 or whatever of their first 10 employees, they never would have got to where they are. Just, and partially some of that's luck and circumstance, and just, and times have changed a lot. In 2022, I feel like things are very, very different in terms of people and their motivation and their work ethic than they were when I was younger. And I definitely feel like I'm turning in my parents when I'm like, kids these days, because it really is different. People say and do things to me as the boss or the owner of a company that I can't even fathom in a billion years is me saying or doing to my boss or my manager or the owner of the company that I work for back in 1998. Like, it's just, I think that they would have literally hit me and they would have got away with it, because you could do that then, even if it wasn't your parents. They just would have like hit me and fired me and literally just kicked me out of the freaking building. And today it's almost like commonplace. You have to coddle people in such a different way. So it's interesting. Things have definitely changed, and it's tough. I think at any point, if you ever ask me, like, what is the hardest thing of running a business, the answer is always going to be people.
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with you. I think getting the right people on board early on is so critically important, right? And fundamentally, even with my management coaching clients, right? Like, a lot of them always ask, like, when is a good time to start with coaching? And I'm like, well, when you start hiring people, because honestly, like, the first couple of hires you get in, if you get the right people, it just makes such a huge difference, right? Like,
100%.
Gigantic difference. Yeah, and reality is, as you mentioned Musk and Jobs and Bill Gates, right? And reality is, for them, that's a large part of luck, because reality is, they were young, they didn't know anything about management, they were not expert at managing or hiring people or whatever. So I'm 100% sure that a large part of their success initially early on was luck, right?
Yep.
I'm very impressed, because the actual journey of developing and, like, coming from a sort of business owner, I'm starting a company, to becoming like actual CEO, like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, like the change, the skills that he needs to learn, everything that he needs to grow and develop. That's freaking incredible that he had been able to do that at a speed where he had been able to keep up with the company. Like that, I know for myself how many years I spent learning to become a good leader and manager, and just learning how to hire great people. That was not an overnight success, right? And yes, of course, when you start making money, you can hire people who are ahead of the game and can help you and support you and teach you and coach you and mentor you and all this. But honestly, that takes a lot of growth, right? And that's, for me, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's not as impressive with Mark Zuckerberg, because he's really just what is a titanium alloy with skin over top of it. What was with the Terminator thing? He's like, I don't know. That guy, obviously, I'm kidding, but he does seem robotic in some ways, but 100%. Like, you got a company of hundreds of thousands of people, and the way that they've grown, like Facebook or not, in the way that they've changed the world for the good and for the bad. That's irrelevant. It's a multi-billion-dollar company that he was in the room by himself with 3 or 4 other people to start with, or whatever, and was able to grow up from that to what it is today. And I'm always just so blown away by those individuals I was mentioning, because like, I know how difficult it is. I know that I've never been able to get over that hump. Because there's just, you look back, I can look back at things that I would have done differently and maybe would have been more successful. And I hope that if the opportunity comes around again the next time, that I'll do a better job. But just being able to do it the first time around is impressive. And I do, again, I attribute a lot of it to luck. I think that it really is those early employees that, come along for the whole ride, that also can grow, that also get the vision and everything that you're doing, and that are also equally bought in, the whole, for that ride, and can develop themselves, because it's hard to bring at any point to bring someone completely fresh and new and in a C-suite role. Eventually, a lot of companies have to do it. All companies really have to do it at some point. But when you're doing it as a part of your first 10 to 20 hires, it's really disruptive and very difficult to keep everybody rolling in the same direction with the same excitement.
Well, let's turn it around the other way around and say you only need one really bad hire in the beginning to really screw things
100%. Yeah.
Right. Like one bad person within your first 10 hires, one person that really have a bad attitude, or they might have technically the right skills and so on, right? Which is obviously what people hire for a lot in the beginning, until they understand it's a lot less about skills, right? But
100%.
One bad person can literally bring you down. Right?
No doubt. And the other thing that's really interesting is, like, you might get along with them really well. Maybe they don't get along with just some other random coworker. They're just, butting heads or whatever. It's just, there's so many things that happen along the way, that are just very, very challenging. And again, I try to put myself in their shoes and think about things from every angle. And a lot of it I understand, but as a business owner, it's very difficult. I mean, it's tough to assemble a really solid team from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned talk about being kind of robotic, right? That's a challenge, right? People like, oh yeah, he's a machine, but I'm like, yeah, and that brings difficulties. That brings, like, how you communicate to people. How are you actually making people like being around you, like working with you? Like, if you're a robot and you're constantly, like, that's the biggest challenge as anything, right? So every person, every personality, there's always strengths and weaknesses, right? Like, and particularly on, like, in your college days or whatever, like when you're 20 or 25 years old, like, you don't know yourself, right? You generally don't know a lot about what you're doing. You're trying stuff, you're testing stuff. You're like, hey, what about doing this? What about doing that? And sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. But reality is that, yeah, it definitely takes a lot to be as successful as they are. And again, like, you can always argue if the companies are good or bad, but at the end of the day, most people, if they could have a company like theirs, they would happily take it, right? But very few people, if any, would be able to run them, would be able to build the kind of success they've built, and that's
absolutely. Yep.
So, Mike, it's been awesome podcasting with you. Any particular resources that you've really loved, or any resources that you would recommend for people who are starting a business, getting into management and hiring people, etc., that you've found really useful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this were a video podcast, you would see behind me on the shelf is this book called Traction that I absolutely love. It's really been the thing that's changed our business and my life more than any single book that I've read. Not to sound dramatic, but it really has been that big of an impact. It's interesting talking about management style and just businesses and luck or managing teams. I always had this problem of, like, it didn't ever seem like we were always on the same page, or like I wanted something in my mind and, like, the team, didn't quite understand what I wanted, or we would just have a lot of instability and just other factors in within the company. And after reading Traction, it was just like one of these, like, massive aha moments of almost all of this was entirely my fault. Of, yes, it was in my head, but I didn't do a good job of communicating our core values, just for instance, or making sure that we had the right people in the right seat, or that we were setting long-term goals that everybody knew what they were, that we were communicating quarterly goals, and just having goals in general that everybody knew what they were. And we were all marching towards the same direction. And more importantly, that we established them and kept them. One of the things that entrepreneurs, myself included, again, I'm throwing myself under the bus here, entrepreneurs love to do is chase that shiny object of the day. Especially someone like me, who's a very tech whiz bang kind of guy. Some new technology comes out, or some new piece of software, or some other thing that I heard about at a conference or whatever. Like, let's go try that. Let's go do this. Let's, and then it's like, hey boss, like what do you actually want me to work on today? What's the number one priority? These are the types of things that were constantly happening. And so, now, I think there's always room to improve and things you can do better. But like I look at how different things are now in the post-traction world for me, where our entire team, again, knows our core values. I feel like we have the right people in the right seats. We have set, 3, 4, 5-year goals, depending on the business. We don't do the 10-year goals that they mentioned in Traction because we're not running a big steel company that's, it's a tech company after all, and things are kind of fluid, but at least we've set a vision that everybody knows where we're looking to be in a few years, and they know what we're going to accomplish in 2023 when that rolls around, and they know what we're going to be doing in Q4 of 2022 or Q1 in 2023 when we set those goals. And we basically work in these 13-week sprints where people get their tasks and we leave them the hell alone to go accomplish them versus constantly pulling them in a bunch of different directions. And so I love that resource. I highly recommend it. Can't thank Gino enough for putting that book together. I was lucky enough to have him on my podcast and be able to personally thank him. It was a great moment in my life. Just think he's done a huge service to the entrepreneurial community by putting that book out.
Yeah. Also a huge fan. Definitely many of my clients and so on also utilizing Traction. I also like it a lot. A few things I do slightly different, but again, I think everything is always about seeing and getting as many ideas into your head as you can, and then
absolutely
figuring out what works for you and so on. But
I mean, it's not a Bible, right? I think it's you look at it, and I also don't follow it exactly to the letter. But we've taken the vast majority of the concepts in there and incorporated them in our business in the way that it fits us the best. And I think that it's absolutely at a minimum worth the read, and then go from there.
Totally. Fantastic, Mike. If people are eager to connect to you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, I always direct people to Ecom Crew, which is our podcast about e-commerce. And so support at ecomcrew.com or ecomcrew.com as the website, Ecom Crew on iTunes, Ecom Crew on all the social media handles. You can reach out in those ways, and it's ECOMCREW. But be happy to help you out. You can either DM me on Ecom Crew on Twitter or send an email to support at ecomcrew.com, and be happy to answer any questions you have.
Fantastic. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, man. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And to the audience, we'll be back again next week. Thank you for hanging on all the way to the end.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.